I would like to go over primary sources in more detail. Think of this as a guide to how to analyze primary sources by looking specifically at Theodore Roosevelt's Strenuous Life speech. Some essential questions to ask to analyze a primary source include who wrote the source, when, and where. Now, it doesn't have to be that somebody wrote it, right? In Roosevelt's case, actually, he gave a speech. What we have is the transcript of a speech. So he stood in front of people and spoke to them. A primary source, though, just has to be a first-hand account from the time and place under investigation, meaning that it could be a painting, it could be a motion picture, it could be a fictional novel. It just has to be something that sheds light on the time and place in which we were investigating. And so the time and place, understanding the time and place, the significance of the time and place, what was going on at that time and place, is what's going to help provide the historical context for making sense of that primary source. So who wrote the source, when, and where are essential for gaining that context. And then we want to move on to what did he or she write, paint, direct, create, whatever type of source it is, right? What was the point of it? What was in it? What was the meaning? What's the significance of what they created? And then finally, what our goal is to get to the why question. We need to consider the audience in order to find out the purpose of the source. But why is the goal? So we don't just want to find out the audience, but finding out who the source is intended for will help shed light on understanding what the purpose of the source was. Right. So for Roosevelt, what do we know? We know who wrote it, right? Theodore Roosevelt. Who was he really, right? He was a pro-imperialist. He wasn't yet president when he gave this speech, right? This is before he becomes a president. So he's a pro-imperialist. He is in the government. He supported the U.S. takeover of the former Spanish colonies after the Spanish-American War. When was this? This was 1899, right? He gave the speech in 1899, which means that it was after the Spanish-American War, but it was before the U.S. had actually succeeded in putting down the Filipino Rebellion. The United States only gained control of the Philippines after it conquered the Filipinos. And where? The United States. That's enough for understanding how to analyze the source with the questions that I gave you. If you want to be really specific, he gave the speech in Chicago, but I didn't give you that information, so I wouldn't expect you to analyze it based on it. Okay, so the first question, who was Roosevelt addressing in his speech? Roosevelt was addressing Americans. More specifically, he was addressing American men. How do we know this? Let's look at the source itself. In paragraph 2, you see where he says, a life of ignoble ease, a life of that peace which springs merely from lack either of desire or of power to strive after great things, is as little worthy of a nation as an individual. I ask only that what every self-respecting American demands from himself and from his sons shall be demanded of the American nation as a whole. Now, Roosevelt's goal is helping the American nation as a whole. Everything is supposed to strive to make America great. But the self-respecting Americans, the himself, his sons, these are key words that show us that he's actually speaking to men, not to women, right? The people who are supposed to lead a strenuous life, those are American men. Right? American women aren't supposed to take part in war. They're not supposed to lead the country. They're not supposed to be scholars helping the country. So this is about men, American men. In addition, Roosevelt makes references to men, boys, and manliness throughout the speech. You can definitely tell he's focused on men in this, right? Masculinity is his point in the speech. He is not speaking to the ladies, right? Another example of where to do this, and there are many throughout the speech. These are just a couple of examples. But another example is if you look in paragraph 8, where Roosevelt contended that some stronger, manlier power would have to step in and do the work, and we would have shown ourselves weaklings, unable to carry to successful completion the labors that the great and high-spirited nations are eager to undertake. Right? You see his emphasis on manlier here. We can see in the second half of paragraph 2 that Roosevelt is again focusing on men. So if you're rich and are worth your salt, you will teach your sons, right? Not your daughters. He's not talking about how to educate women. He's talking about how to educate men here. So in the second half of paragraph 2, we can see what Roosevelt wants the wealthy to do, right? If you are rich and are worth your salt, you will teach your sons that though they may have leisure, it is not to be spent in idleness. Now, this doesn't tell us what the rich are supposed to do, right? We know the rich aren't supposed to just sit around and have fun all the time, right? But he goes on to be more specific. For widely used leisure merely means that those who possess it, being free from the necessity of working for their livelihood, are all the more bound to carry on some kind of non-remunerative work. Now, what does he mean there? He means that they need to be educated, right? You see in the sciences and letters and art and exploration and historical research. So wealthy people are supposed to make sure that their sons are becoming educated, that they are sitting around spending their free time thinking, right? Not playing pool, not what people would do today, maybe playing video games or looking on their cell phones, but that they're supposed to be conducting real scholarly work. And the whole point is to make it better for the nation as a whole. So why is it that wealthy people are supposed to be educated, right? He doesn't say that the common man should be educated to benefit America as a whole. It's the wealthy that should. And he points it out in this highlighted part here, being free from the necessity of working for their livelihood. So the idea was if you were going to be an educated person, back then, highly educated person, right? Not the basic education, not reading and writing, but to be a highly educated person, you needed to have time in order to learn new things and to think up new things, become innovative. And you couldn't spend your time working in order to gain the basic necessities of life. So you had to have enough money. You had to be independently wealthy in order to be able to support yourself while you thought up things instead of working in the mill to get money to put food on the table. So this is specifically directed toward wealthy men. Now, most of the rest of the speech is aimed at the common man, right? He's just not letting rich men off the hook here. Why did Roosevelt want rich men to become educated? What was the goal? What's the overarching end goal for wealthy people to become educated? So we go back to the same paragraph. And if you look at the very bottom part of that paragraph that I have highlighted in red, the type we most need in this country, the successful carrying out of which reflects most honor upon the nation. So here we see Roosevelt's goal, right? Honor upon the nation. His goal is to make America a great nation, right? A powerful nation. His goal is world power. And so, as far as he is concerned, wealthy people becoming educated are going to make the nation look good to the rest of the world, right? In this national competition that's taking place at the late 19th century, early 20th century, Roosevelt wants to win this race, right? He wants to win this competition against other nation states. One way to compete, you have more innovation, you have more inventions, you have more intelligent people, you have better artwork. This is going to increase the prestige of the United States. So we see in answering what I just talked about that we're actually answering question 2, or at least part of question 2. What was his ultimate goal? What was Roosevelt's ultimate goal? So something with the national good, right? Honoring the nation. But it's more to it than that. So keep this question in mind as we go through other parts of the speech. Hopefully, the analysis of paragraph 2 is beginning to show that source analysis involves more than scanning for the keywords and writing what is nearby. It requires active reading of the text, right? A close reading of the text, paying attention to word choice. What words did in this case, the speaker use to convey his point? Some questions require the analysis of multiple paragraphs in the document, We have answered part of questions 2 and 3, but we're not yet done with them. So we have to go beyond paragraph 2 in the document in order to be able to find the rest of those answers. Note that Roosevelt's ultimate goal is the end point of what Roosevelt wanted to achieve. So it is not that he wanted people to lead a strenuous life, right? The strenuous life, men leading a strenuous life, is the method of getting to that ultimate goal. Does that make sense? The method is the strenuous life, so we still need to find that ultimate goal. So keep this question in mind as we go through the document. But first, let's look at the second part of question 3. What were the duties of the common man? What were the duties of the common man? So when Roosevelt is talking to people in his speech and not saying rich men, he's talking to common men. So if you scan down and look at paragraph 6, you will see the timid man, the lazy man, the man who distrusts his country, the over-civilized man, who has lost the great fighting, masterful virtues, the ignorant man, and the man of dull mind, whose soul is incapable of feeling the mighty lift that thrills, stern men with empires in their brains. All these, of course, shrink from seeing the nation undertake its duties. Shrink from seeing us build a navy and an army adequate to our needs. Shrink from seeing us do our share in the world's work by bringing order out of chaos in the great fair tropic islands from which the valor of our soldiers and sailors has driven the Spanish flag. These are the men who fear the strenuous life, who fear the only national life which is really worth leading. So who is Roosevelt talking about here? He's talking about everybody who disagrees with him. He is talking about everybody who is against imperialism. And so he doesn't say that outright. He says that they are timid men, lazy men, men who distrust his country. So instead of just saying that he disagrees with them on a policy matter, he's denouncing them on a personal level, right? This is a personal attack. And we thought that political attacks were just cruel today, right? They're doing personal attacks over 100 years ago, politically. So when he's saying the timid man, the lazy man, the man who distrusts his country, it's really a way for him to denounce his opponents, right? To make them seem weak in the eyes of others in order to try to persuade people to support his position. Now, what's interesting is when he talks about the over-civilized man. Who's the over-civilized man? This is specific to late 19th, early 20th century. If we think of the larger context of the late 19th, early 20th century, what we learned from in Module 2, you have industrialization. Right? The United States is becoming an industrial powerhouse by the turn of the 20th century. And once you get an industrial society, yes, you still have people doing manual labor, right? You still have farmers. But in the 20th century, you're going to have more people not farming than people who are farming. So you're going to have more people in factories and offices. And you do have factory workers who are still using manual labor. But you have more and more people who are taking desk jobs, who are sitting at a desk all day long, right? You're getting the accountants who are sitting at the desk all day long. If you're sitting at your desk all day long, you are not working out in the gym. You are not running a marathon. You are not building muscle, right? So you're getting a little soft and weak. And what they're thinking of in the late 19th, early 20th century is you have men who, instead of spending their day doing manual labor, are now spending the day sitting at a desk. Now, there's always been some people who have been sitting at a desk, writing, reading, computing numbers, but you have a higher percentage now than ever before at the late 19th century, early 20th century. And this affects how people view themselves and view the country as a whole. So there starts to be this crisis of masculinity in the late 19th century where men feel that they're not quite as manly as they were before. And the way Roosevelt would define manly is somebody who's physically strong and who's willing to fight, to take over other people. That for him is masculinity. And so anybody who doesn't fit that is something other than that. So when he's saying the over-civilized man, what he's pointing out are the the people with desk jobs, right? That there's too many people with desk jobs and they're used to the easy life, right? They don't have to fight for their work. They don't have to risk their life at a machine. So that's a specific term that only makes sense in the late 19th century. So then he goes on, who has lost the great fighting, masterful virtues, the ignorant man. So not only are they weak and not manly, but they're also stupid, right? The man of dull mind, right? Not creative. And then the even more interesting, right, would be the part in red, whose soul is incapable of feeling the mighty lift that thrills stern men with empires in their brain. This is showing Roosevelt's own beliefs right here, right? His own feelings. So feeling the mighty lift that thrill, that's an emotional response, right? That's a physical response. It's basically an adrenaline rush. He's saying the mighty lift that thrills, right? Think of that today. How would you say that? You wouldn't go around saying feeling the mighty lift that thrills. You would say an adrenaline rush, right? So he's saying that men who are thinking of empire, who are thinking of expanding American power, they actually get an adrenaline rush from doing this. And he's saying this because he himself is getting an adrenaline rush for doing this, right? Roosevelt wasn't just all talk. He left his desk job to go fight in the Spanish-American War, right? That's his background before he's giving this speech. He left the desk job to go fight in the war. So all these, of course, shrink from seeing the nation undertake its duties. Shrink from seeing us build a navy and an army adequate to our needs. Shrink from seeing us do our share of the world's work by bringing order out of chaos in the great fair tropic islands from which the value of our soldiers and sailors has driven out the Spanish flags. So his point here is that the common man needs to fight, right? The common man needs to fight for the honor of his nation, to take over more lands, which will add prestige to America. This is all part of this international competition, right? Europeans have been competing, particularly in the late 19th century, to see which one is the greater nation state. And as they're competing, one of the ways they're competing is to see who has more colonies than somebody else. It's like cars, right? It's like wealthy people with fancy cars. Well, I have 4 cars, but you have 6, so that means you're actually better than me. So he's seeing this as a competition, and we're going to see this more in other parts of his speech. So overall, Roosevelt wanted rich men to contribute to the nation as a whole by becoming educated, and he wanted the common man to fight for American prestige on the world stage. He wanted them to go into battle to defeat other powers, to take over other places, to gain world power. Right? This is his ultimate goal, is making the United States a powerful country on the world stage and respected by other countries. And to drive that point home, at the end of paragraph 20, right, he says, above all, let us shrink from no strife, moral or physical, within or without the nation, provided we are certain that the strife is justified. For it is only through strife, through hard and dangerous endeavor, that we shall ultimately win the goal of true national greatness. This is Roosevelt's ultimate goal. Let's go back to that second question, right? This is his ultimate goal, is true national greatness, making the United States a major world power on the world stage that can compete against the other major world powers. How does one become a great nation, according to Roosevelt? Well, Roosevelt's influenced by the context of its time. Remember, time and place matter. Remember that new imperialism of the late 19th century, fueled by economic motive, but also by national competition, right? The competition of nation states against other nation states. So fighting and taking over colonies was one way for a nation state to show that it was a great nation. As one nation state gained more colonies, it would make that nation state look more powerful. It would increase its power on the world stage. The fear was that if a country did not become an imperial power, then the other world powers would pass it by and might even take it over. We see Roosevelt being influenced by the nation-state competition of the late 19th century. It was, by the way, a transatlantic trend, right? This is not just Americans feeling this way. European powers were also taking part in this competition. It's actually what's going to lead Europe to World War I, right? Or one of the contributing factors that leads Europe to World War I. So we can see Roosevelt's fear of this national competition taking place in the late 19th century and the fear that other countries might take over if the United States doesn't become a major imperial power. So in paragraph 5, he says, "We of this generation do not have to face a task such as that our fathers face." He's referencing the Civil War generation there, by the way, right? Feeling a little less manly after the great heroes of the Civil War era. Right? But he continues, "But we have our tasks, and woe to us if we fail to perform them. We cannot, if we would, play the part of China and be content to rot by inches in ignoble ease within our borders, taking no interest in what goes on beyond them, sunk in a scrambling commercialism." Now, he's pointing out China here because China has been carved up by the major world powers. The United States was a little late to the imperial game, right? It was busy taking over land that was actually connected to the United States, right? That was adjacent to it. So they're a little late of venturing abroad over the seas. And by the time the U.S. really joins in this international imperialistic race, China has already been carved up by the other major world powers. And when China was carved up, right, you have this once great power now seeming weak and conquered by others. And so this is a real fear for people. They don't want to end up like China, right? This great power that's now taken over, right? There's spheres of influence. Britain has a chunk, France has a chunk, Russia has a chunk, Japan even has a chunk. It will have a chunk. Right? In paragraph 5, he goes on to say, "Heedless of the higher life, the life of aspiration, of toil and risk, busying ourselves only with the wants of our bodies for the day, until suddenly we should find, beyond a shadow of question, what China has already found, that in this world the nation that has trained itself to a career of unwarlike and isolated ease is bound, in the end, to go down before other nations, which have not lost that manly and adventurous qualities. If we are to be a really great people, we must strive in good faith to play a great part in the world." So again, right, if there was any question that he's talking about men, he's emphasizing manliness here, right? What's manly? His version of manliness, being warlike. So let's stop here. I think that was enough to give you an idea of how to approach primary sources, what to think about while you're reading it. As always, as you're going along with the material in the course, let me know if you have any questions. And if you'd like more one-on-one instruction on primary sources, we can set up a phone meeting or a face-to-face meeting.